All right, folks, welcome back from the commercial break. As I said at the top of the show, it is Wednesday, so it means it's AMAC Wednesday, one of my favorite moments of the week. We bring in my good friend Bobby Charles to talk about the most pressing issues. In fact, most issues we talk about don't get talked about in the legacy media. That's what makes AMAC and their partnership so important. We pick stories and issues that matter to patriots in America, not to elitists who run Washington, the media, and big tech on so many different fronts. So today we're going to have a big conversation about the border executive order and its ties to voting. Yep, there's a tie between these two things. But before I bring Bobby in, just a quick reminder. If you want to say thank you to AMAC, if you want to be part of the Patriot community that is AMAC, I'm a card-carrying member. There's a very special deal in June. If you sign up today at amac.us/justnews, AMAC, AMAC.us/justnews, you're going to get a 2-year membership for just $16. That is incredibly a good deal. Go do it today. It's a way to say thank you to AMAC, but more importantly, it's a way to say thank you to yourself because you're going to surround yourself with like-minded Americans who are fighting to make this country better. amac.us/justnews. Go do it today. It really means a lot. All right. It's time to bring in my very good friend, Bobby Charles. Bobby, welcome back to the show.
Always great to be with you, John.
All right. There was an extraordinary moment yesterday. It's as though Joe Biden suddenly found the executive power he said he lost and couldn't find for months. He finally puts out an executive order, but it allows and codifies at least 2,500 illegal aliens a day coming into the country before there's any action. And it has all of these extraordinary loopholes. For instance, people who schedule to come in illegally to the country through the Border One app, they aren't counted towards the number. People who get away from the border quickly, get 100 miles inland, they're not counted. This had so many loopholes. It looked like it had more holes than the border wall that they started to disassemble. How big a head fake is this by Joe Biden?
You know, you describe it as a head fake, John, and that's a good description. I think you could also call it a double sleight of hand. I mean, this is this last-minute Hail Mary pass, which frankly doesn't even really get out of his hands. But the idea is to tell people, oh, I care about the border. So for one group of people, this is supposed to be a head fake, a jink that tells you, he does care finally about the border. So now these independents and moderate Democrats that, are trying to check that box so that they can still justify voting for a guy that's really not there, they've got something to check off. But the bigger part is what you just described. It's the double sleight of hand. It's actually opening the door, ironically, to more illegal aliens getting deeper into the country. And I'm happy to talk more about what the impact of that is on the election. I have done as many deep dives as I think I can do in the last week to understand how serious this illegal alien voting development is. And I think it's getting more serious, not less serious.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It really is. And we had Chairman Brian Stile, House Administration Committee Chairman, on the show recently. We had Oversight Subcommittee Chairman Barry Loudermilk. And you now have these circumstances where the District of Columbia tried to legalize non-citizen voting in local elections. You've got communities in California, Vermont, Massachusetts, if I remember correctly. About a dozen of these communities are allowing non-citizen voting. So what's happening is this illegal influx that Joe Biden now has, which is easily 6 to 8 million and could be as high as 12 million, they're beginning to flow into cities that are blue, sanctuary cities, where they're going to get to vote, at least at local elections, and also count towards apportionment, meaning how many congressional seats a sanctuary state gets, how many federal dollars a sanctuary state gets. There's no doubt that these strategies are tied, right? Getting from the open border to non-citizen voting and apportionment, it's all one strategy, right?
Well, you're right, John. So let me unpack that a little bit. Obviously, in blue states, as in any state, we are worried about the onset of illegal voting becoming de facto or de jure by law legal. And that, as you say, affects the census. It affects the downstream flow of benefits and of congressional seats. But my concern is that you really have what amounts to an illegal voting pandemic, something that's like an infectious disease. And here's how it works. Just in a matter of months, we've seen jurisdictions, I think there are now somewhere between, I think that's actually north of 17 districts, cities all over the country that are adopting, because the state constitutions don't block it, they are adopting these ordinances or these provisions that allow undocumented, non-citizen, illegal aliens whatever new name you'd like to give them, allowing them to vote in local elections. Now, technically, they're not allowed to vote in state elections, and they're not allowed to vote in federal elections. But let me again unpack this a little bit. What that means is that in places like everywhere from San Francisco and Oakland, California to Washington, D.C., I mean, literally 10 different cities in Maryland, including Chevy Chase, all these places around the country. And you mentioned Vermont, you're dead right. You got legislation promoted by these progressive Democrats in virtually all of the states. So you've got in Maine, the Speaker of the House, diehard Democrat, has basically tried to cajole her constituency or caucus to go forward with illegal voting. And so, again, I want to go deeper and deeper in this for a minute. Think about this for a minute. You get a registration to vote. There are no separate ballots given to illegal aliens and to citizens. You walk in, you say, I'd like to have a ballot to vote, or you say, gracias and blah, 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 I'd like to have a ballot to vote. They give you a ballot, or you just have somebody send in, or you send in, or a block of them get sent in for absentee ballots. Now what happens? Now you check off that you're a U.S. citizen. Well, maybe you're not a U.S. citizen, but if you're not in a state that has ID, including purple and red states, if you don't have voter ID laws, then there's nobody that's going to ever check whether you really were or weren't. You now check off your local dog catcher, but there's nothing that prevents you from not checking off your Senate and House candidates for the U.S. Senate and House, all your legislative candidates, your gubernatorial candidate, and your president of the United States and vice president. Because why? We have secret ballots. Nobody, when you drop that ballot back in the box again, nobody opens it up and says, wait a minute, this is from an illegal alien. They can't vote for the president. So we have both a logistical and a de facto and a legal problem. And the problem is that illegal voting, once that epidemic gets in place, and it's not like this is an accident, John. In the state of Maine up here, there is a pledge privately by the Democrats to bring 75,000 illegal aliens in as quote-unquote new Americans, an idea that has now spread to 18 states. It's being run by a network. You know that network, just like in 1996 with the illegal immigration problems that happened back then during the Clinton-Gore era, you know they're going to be aligned. I did those investigations. They're going to be aligned with voter organizations. They're all Democrat affiliated. Whether they have Zucker dollars coming into their state or not, the bottom line is, which is dollars that are being dedicated to hiring activists in the municipalities to count the votes, there is an intent and there is now a means and there is clearly a motivation. So, and the notion that you're going to somehow, I haven't heard of one illegal alien being prosecuted for illegal voting. They're not being prosecuted for being illegal aliens or committing crimes against young women. They're sure as hell not going to be prosecuted for voting illegally. So we've got a bubbling problem, John, and we've got to look at it seriously. And AMAC fights against this every single day in every legislature they can get to, and at the federal government. They were all over the Hill 2 weeks ago saying you cannot allow this to happen. You've got to block this stuff. At the state level, you got to block it, local and federal.
People say, well, is this a hypothetical concern or is it real? Well, we know just from this past week that there were 500 non-citizens already on the Washington, D.C. voter rolls for the primary this past Tuesday. When Texas Secretary of State did an audit a year ago, he found more than 12,000 suspected non-citizens trying to get on the voter rolls in Texas. When Brad Raffensperger, the Georgia Secretary of State, did an audit a few months ago, he found about 1,200 or maybe 1,600, non-citizens trying to get on the voter rolls. There are, beyond the laws codifying non-citizen voting, you can see it now even in states where it isn't allowed. People are tempted or are trying to get on the voter rolls. It is a real threat. It isn't a hypothetical threat. It is real. Tell us about what happens when folks from AMAC start to engage legislatures and election officials on this issue. Is there legitimate concern back in the election regulatory world?
There is, and I will tell you that you got to tip your hat to AMAC because, and it's not really me that does this personally. I do a lot of communication. These folks that are on the ground, these 2 million plus members that are out there going to their own legislatures, I mean, they show you how to do it, where to do it, what to do with it. Again, amac.us and /U. Bottom line is, John, they are out there and they are moving the dial. And so, I often think Colin Powell used to tell me, and I was his assistant secretary of state after the Reagan and Bush White Houses and investigations, on the Hill. They used to say you got to look around corners. You got to always be looking around corners. And part of what we're doing at AMAC, and part of what I think America needs to do, is look around the next corner. Maybe the next pandemic is illegal voting. And really what I'm saying here is, be thoughtful about where the rubber meets the road, how this really works. And how this really works is, there's a proliferating, to use an advertising term, there's a proliferating buzz out there among these, Soros-affiliated and other groups that are pro-illegal aliens, and all these groups that are out there pushing, they don't distinguish between illegal and legal aliens, and all of a sudden you've got these new Americans offices being promoted by Democrat governors and legislatures, and you're going, well, geez, hey, what's going on here? How did all those buses arrive here, and jeepers, what is going on here? And what's happening is, this is a very well orchestrated effort to put voters who are not entitled to vote, and every one of them that votes takes away a vote from you and me, who are citizens, and it's intended, obviously, to tip the balance in a lot of these states. Now, will it tip the balance? I hope that it won't, because I'm hoping, number one, that in most of the important races and referenda, there's overwhelming support for one side. But when it comes down to the margins, and you have thousands of voters showing up in states that don't belong there, in some cases tens of thousands, and the idea behind this is to create a buzz that allows this to become sort of an infectious problem all over the country. What you're really looking at, when I see numbers like Washington, D.C., and as you said, maybe a week ago there were 500, I think they're now 1,000, somewhere in that range of people who had, registered. Okay, when I see that, to me, I think Titanic. I think we're seeing the tip of the iceberg. Okay, there's a huge iceberg under the water that we don't see, and that iceberg has the potential to disrupt the entire election process. So AMAC fights every single day to stop illegal voting and to stop illegal aliens from voting. And they frame these people, as you know, John. Go look at the statute, for example, the ordinance in San Francisco. There's like 18 flavors. There's more ways to describe an illegal alien than the progressive has for genders. It's crazy. There's stuff all over the place. So I think what we're trying to do here is allow citizens to preserve the franchise so that they can elect those that they want elected to govern them, because they pay taxes and they're citizens, and we are trying to block non-citizens from voting.
Yeah, and it's pretty remarkable when you look at the polling. This is a super majority issue in America. 70, 80, 90% Americans do not believe non-citizens should be allowed to vote. It's a winning issue. People understood that citizenship came with benefits that can't be transferred to someone who doesn't share the value of citizenship. And it's such a remarkable thing. I want to pivot to one other issue before we let you go, Bobby. When I had a story this morning, the latest in a long line we've done with Chairman Loudermilk's subcommittee, the House Administration Oversight Subcommittee, and it reveals that the Secret Service driver who could debunk the story, the sensational story that Cassidy Hutchinson told the world in the summer of 2022. He tried to go to the Democrats' J6 committee in July of 22 after Cassidy testified in August. In September, he was rebuffed 3 times. The committee was only interested in getting his side of the story, which, by the way, was firsthand. As you know, Cassidy Hutchinson was a third-hand hearsay. Heard it from a friend, from a friend, from a friend. And they wait until after the election or basically election day, the day before the election, to interview him. They hold it for many more months. So the public is kept in the doubt that Cassidy Hutchinson's story wasn't true. You held one of the most important oversight jobs in Congress. Is that the job of Congress, to hide the truth from the American people?
It's not only not the job of Congress, it's the job of Congress to find the truth and to shine bright light on it. The greatest disinfectant is bright light. So, John, one of the portions of my life was 5 years under Gingrich, and dedicated to the proposition of doing real oversight in the U.S. House of Representatives. I ran the committee that did all of the oversight for the Departments of Justice, State, Defense, and NASA. The Justice Department investigations included things like the Waco investigation. What we're seeing now, and by the way, the illegal immigration sort of gambit in 1996, the reality is, John, what we're seeing now goes way beyond that. I understand people don't want to keep talking about January 6th because it brings up all these visuals. It's like the minute somebody says something about January 6th, it's like 9/11 in your mind. You have the picture of the towers. You talk about January 6th, and Democrats have completely saturated the public consciousness with this idea that you've got a bunch of people running through the Capitol looking like buffaloes. Well, all right, bottom line is this is a much more serious issue than that, and here's why. People don't know this story the way you and I do, John. What transpired here was that committee that did that investigation basically took what was a raucous criminal fringe event, which came from less than 1,000 people out of 120,000 who went off and did their criminal, sort of petty criminal activity, their bursting through the Capitol, and all of the things associated with that. But the real event was what followed. The real event was that this January 6th committee, which was effectively run by Liz Cheney, who is a self-interested, in my opinion, unethical, and extremely self-promoting member of Congress on the Republican side, who was feeling vitriol because of how she'd been treated also by some of the Republicans. She just wasn't, conservative enough, and they didn't like that. Just like her parents, I'm sorry to say, she demonstrated no integrity and went in there and started intimidating witnesses into telling stories. And in fact, the story that's out today, and God bless Chairman Loudermilk, I mean, he's doing a real investigation very methodically, non-hysterically, and what he's discovering is that what looked like criminal violations on the part of some of these members, now he's not going to say that, but I am, as a former litigator, they look like criminal violations in many cases. And what they did is they brought witnesses in, privately took them to private little rooms, got them to say things that were, now we learn, untrue. And when the Secret Service, your story of today, came up and said, hey, wait, whoa, that's not what happened. We were there. Okay, that's not what happened. They stiff-armed them for months and wouldn't hear it. Why? Because they wanted their narrative to dominate that election cycle. And frankly, don't be surprised if they try to resuscitate it again. There are a lot of, angry, unethical people who feel that ends justify the means. Most of them have D's in front of their names as it comes to Congress. They don't care. There are a few Republicans too, but the bottom line is ethics and integrity in government mean that if you know the truth, just like in a court of law, there's what they call Jenks evidence and Brady evidence. If you have exculpatory evidence that is going to show that your storyline is untrue, in a court of law, you are compelled to present that as a prosecutor. You have to give to the defense what shows that the defense was actually not guilty, and that may lead to a dropping of charges. In this case, there are no checks and no balances, and there were none on that January 6th committee. And everybody was, they were in a state of, heady anti-Trump, kind of a stupor. And the result is they stopped, John. They stopped truth from coming out. And, there's a point at which you cross a line when the American people have a right to know, and you're not only not telling them, but you're obfuscating it and creating a false story. That's got to be told.
Yeah, no, you said it right. They stopped truth from coming out. That is such a remarkable statement to think one of the three branches of government was actively involved in stopping truth from coming out. So well put. Bobby, we love every time you come on the show, you bring such wisdom, you bring such clarity. You're also a horizon watcher. You see what's coming out over the horizon before most, and you help us get there. Such an honor to have you on the show. Such an honor to have a partnership with AMAC like we do. I just look forward to this moment every Wednesday so much. Thanks for joining us today.
You're welcome, John. And I'm just going to tell you, I'll say it off air as well as on air, or on air as well as off. You're one of the greatest investigators we've ever had in the public space. And I honestly, John, if it is not for people like you, the Republic is in a kind of peril that we just have to have people like you and this show and people who are AMAC members. And again, if you want to be part of the fight, you tell them where to go, John, and I'll tell you, go join AMAC, because it is the place where the fight is real. Whether you're talking St. Paul's fight or a political fight, it's the real fight.
Yeah. That is such a great point. It is the real fight. The future of our country will be determined maybe for a half century or more in these next 6 months. And we're so lucky to have you along our side as we try to chronicle and educate the American public. Thanks again for your time today, buddy. It's such a good conversation every time. All right, folks, if you want to say thank you to AMAC for putting such amazing people like Bobby Charles working with us in front of the American people as the national spokesman for AMAC, go to amac.us/justnews. Go get one of those 2-year memberships, just $16. amac.us/justnews. Do it and say thank you. By the way, you're not only going to be saying thank you to AMAC, you're going to say thank you to yourself, because all of a sudden you're going to get discounts, a monthly magazine, a weekly podcast, daily news, and daily opportunities to become an engaged patriot and citizen, like doing election watching or contacting your state legislature or contacting Congress. You feel good when you're an AMAC member because you're doing good for this country. Go do it today. amac.us/justnews.